Man trapped aboard his own ship explains the wild story. Just because the sea's calling doesn't mean you have to pick up the phone. The ocean isn't always pina coladas and suntans, and the shipping industry that traverses it is even more fickle. Mohammad Aisha, a young sailor from Syria, learned this lesson the hard way. The 29-year-old loved his life and work across the seas, but one uninformed decision left him stranded at sea for years, unsure if he'd ever touch dry land again. Before we begin, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to our channel, and click the notification bell for more amazing videos. It was July of 2017, and Mohammad was the chief officer aboard the Bahrain-flagged MV Aman cargo ship. After 2 months of trouble-free sailing, the ship stopped at the port of Adabiya in Egypt. Mohammad was left in charge while the captain ran errands ashore. Seemed like any other routine stop. Mohammad was working on a few customary repairs when he spied a stranger approaching from down the pier. He squinted at the sunlight. The man was an Egyptian court courier. Curious, he climbed down from his post and made his way down to greet the guest. He had no clue how much he'd come to regret letting this man on board. The courier carried a letter that would put a stop to the crew's travels. It declared that the MV Aman would be detained in the Egyptian port due to safety certificates expiring. Additionally, the owners had debt that needed to be paid off. As Mohammad would find out, the ship's owners didn't handle their business well. The courier showed Mohammad a $21,500 invoice for a 3-ton anchor bought the year before by the ship's owner. To make matters worse, the Lebanese contractors failed to pay for fuel. With the owners in financial hardship, the MV Aman would have to remain in the port until it was paid off or sold. Since Mohammad was left in charge, he figured he could sign the official documents for the court courier. As part of the document that Mohammad signed would declare him as the legal guardian, which his captain recommended to be a good decision. None the wiser, Mohammad followed the advice. Without knowing what he was agreeing to, he realized soon afterward that he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. He hadn't realized that being a ship's guardian was a 24/7 job. Mohammad couldn't leave the MV Aman for any reason. When he realized what he was in for, he called the ship's agent, but there was nothing anyone could do. With no other choice, he settled in for what he thought would be a few months, but months stretched on, and when he'd been there a year, Mohammad's despair got even worse. A full year and a month passed since his forced guardianship began, and not only was the abandoned ship beginning to decay, but so was Mohammad's life. In August 2018, the trapped sailor received the heartbreaking news that his mother had passed away. Rather than allow Mohammad to momentarily return home to grieve, the ship company forced him to remain aboard. This was Mohammad's lowest point in the ordeal. His mom wasn't just the woman who gave him life. They had a close relationship, and she'd even taught him to speak English. When Mohammad wasn't even allowed to say goodbye, it hit him hard. "I seriously considered ending my life," he told the BBC. Somehow, though, his inner strength took over. Another year passed for Mohammad, and as inspiring as his resilience was, his crewmates didn't share the same spirit. One by one, they decided to leave, abandoning Mohammad in the process. There was the occasional guard who came aboard, but aside from that, it was just Mohammad, alone with the MV Aman and the rodents that scurried the cargo hold. Nighttime was the worst, when the port was at its quietest. Some might find it peaceful, but to Mohammad, the dark and the quiet of the dying ship was like sitting in a graveyard, and it felt like he was sleeping in his own coffin. And as health began to dwindle, his time on the ship grew even more dangerous. Mohammad was given minimal support through the ship's agent. He was sent food and fuel, but towards the summer of 2019, those deliveries became smaller and smaller. There was even days when he only had small pieces of dry bread to eat throughout the day. It was at this point that he became desperate. In September of that year, Mohammad sent out distress signals on 2 separate days, trying to alert officials that there was no way for him to survive on the decaying ship. When no one responded, Mohammad knew that there was no way he could continue to stay on the ship. He decided it was finally his turn to abandon. Surely the legal team would understand. The young sailor took a lifeboat and rowed it to the shore, hoping to somehow cut through the bureaucratic red tape. But local police were there to oppose him. They knew about his situation, but when they caught him walking on Egyptian soil, they had to escort him back to the graveyard ship. Without an Egyptian visa, he wasn't legally allowed on shore. Mohammad begged them to take him to jail, but they claimed he didn't do anything to merit an arrest. When he was taken back to the MV Aman, it was like returning to prison. Only one thing would keep his spirits high. Although he couldn't see most of his family in person, Mohammed's brother was also a sailor who often passed through the Adabiya port. Each time they'd wave to each other from their ships, barely able to really see that far. but each knew the other was there. These moments of reprieve helped remind Mohammed he wasn't alone, and they helped him survive through what would come next. In October, the neglected ship began to flood. The already desperate Mohammed rushed to call for help, shouting "Mayday, Mayday" into the radio. As the ship began to sink with him still in it, a military patrol rescued him and took him to shore. But rather than provide comfort after a near-death experience, both the military and the police interrogated Mohammed, suspecting he'd tried to engineer an escape. The interrogation lasted for 10 days while the ship was repaired. Soon after the interrogations, Mohammed was sent back once again to the MV Aman. This time, though, he wasn't alone. The ship's agent didn't trust him by himself and hired a retired sailor named Mohammed Kamel to help guard the ship and keep Mohammed out of trouble. At first, Mohammed was stern with Mohammed, but it didn't take long for sympathy to grow. Mohammed had become so ill from being abandoned that he developed scurvy-like symptoms, lost teeth, and was in so much pain all the time he needed 12 painkillers just to fall asleep. There wasn't much time left. He needed divine intervention. Several more months flew by and Mohammed's condition wasn't getting any better. It was a miracle he was still alive. But at this point, miracles were all he had left to look forward to. Most people wouldn't think an oncoming storm was good news, but what happened next would be an immense relief for Mohammed. The storm arrived in the Adabia port in March 2020. It was so incredibly strong it blew the MV Aman 5 times from its anchorage, just a few hundred meters from the shoreline. As terrifying as it was, Mohammed believed it was an act of God. He jumped overboard and swam his way to the safety of shore, where he was again met by police, this time with slightly better news. Seeing the shape he was in, local authorities were now more sympathetic to Mohammed's plight. Even after the storm settled, they allowed Mohammed to remain on land until sunset, and although they still had to send him back, they did give him another bit of support. From that point on, Mohammed was allowed to return to shore every few days to retrieve food and water and charge his phone. Since he could only legally come to shore by swimming through the port's waters, locals gave him the nickname Castaway, and his story began to spread. He soon gained another ally in his corner. Mohammed's case was not the first time a sailor had been abandoned, which is why the International Transport Workers Federation, or ITF for short, exists to support those who are being abused. The ITF began working on Mohammed's case in December of 2020, chipping away tirelessly every day at their goal to bring him home. ITF's Arab World and Iran Network coordinator Mohammad Aisha worked with the ship owner, the Bahraini Register, and the Egyptian authorities for months before they finally found a breakthrough in April 2021. Someone was found to replace Mohammed so he could finally return home. The ITF managed to find a union representative in Egypt to take Mohammed's place. It was enough to please the courts, freeing Mohammed from his legal shackles. Once the courts approved, the ITF moved quickly to process Mohammed's immigration and also arrange for a COVID-19 test, which was required even for someone who was already in isolation. Mohammed was aware of what was happening in the world with the pandemic, but not even COVID-19 could stop him from returning home to his beloved family. Unfortunately, not everyone would be there to welcome him home. As he was packing to leave for home, Mohammed was given the news that his grandmother had passed away. "I will never forgive the people who kept me here while I lost my family one by one," he bitterly shared, before finally leaving the port of Adabia for good. Living on the MV Aman might have been like a prison sentence, but today, Mohammad Aisha is happily safe at home with his family, who threw a welcome party for him upon his return. Although his past 4 years as a sailor have been like a living hell, he says he still wants to return to what he does best. Mohammed plans to rest up, restore his health, and spend time with his family before returning to sea after his long ordeal. However, not every stranded story is as brutal as his. Please share this with your friends and family.